Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first live event of 2025. And I have the pleasure to have with me Francesca Gino. We will ask her to introduce herself in a moment. But first of all, we want to know a bit more about you that are joining us for this event about the art of influencing, winning hearts, changing minds. Allora, why don't you tell us something about from where you're joining us? Or so that could be a good way to tell us something about yourself, or maybe something about your expectations from this workshop, so that you remember those live events are for you that are joining lives, and for all the ones that watch the recording afterwards. We have a large number of people that watch our recordings afterwards, so warm welcome also to the ones that will be watching the recording. So now the floor to the people that are joining us live. And if you could tell us, either from where you're joining, or maybe, some specific expectation, some challenge. The topic of influencing, I know that, is consistently recognized as one of the core skills of the future, something that will continue to be there despite all the technological influences and all those kind of things that are going through. So how about tell us a bit more about what you want to get from this event, and by the way we run our events is that I will be asking a few questions to Francesca. Probably it's going to be an exchange, so, of course, I will say a few words, but then, we will be taking your question along the event. So, don't be afraid to ask your questions. Okay, now, how about as we have people joining us, we have here we have the first participants that join us from Rome. By the way, both Francesca and I are Italians, but both are living abroad. So it will be interesting to see what will be the audience for this event. Okay, that's Catherine. Hello, joining us from Switzerland. That's where I'm indeed living. Hello, Christina. Good to reconnect. Oh, hello, Julia. I'm joining Julia or Christina? Wait a moment. It looks strange. We have the profile of Christina, but we have the name of Julia joining us from Zurich. Okay, but anyhow, you're both welcome. And okay, so yes, we have quite a few representatives from Switzerland for the time being, but I'm sure we're going to have people from other places. Okay. Hello, Henner from Germany. Perfect. Fantastic. Great to see you. So, okay, as more people connect, how about getting to know a bit more about our speakers? Francesca.
Hi, Giuseppe. So nice to be here. And so nice to be talking about a topic that, as Enor was saying, is something we all do all the time. As you said, I'm Francesca Gino. I wear many different hats. I'm a professor, I'm an author, I'm a management consultant, I'm a coach. I love advising leaders and companies. And one of the topics that I'm very passionate about is, in fact, influence, because it's all about human interactions. And sometimes we are unable to get the best outcomes for ourselves, our team, and our organization simply because we don't have good enough skills when it comes to influencing. So very much looking forward to our conversation.
Fantastic. On my side, I'm Giuseppe. I'm also a professor at a business school. And before that, I've been spending 25 years in a corporate environment with 4 leading multinationals. All right, so let's get started. For the people that are joining one of our live events for the first time, I will start with a question, But remember, we are very much interested about your question. So, do not hesitate to write them down in the chat. Okay, maybe let's start. You said we talked about how influence is an important topic, but sometimes, also a misunderstood topic. So, from your experience, Francesca, what is the most surprising misconception people have about influence?
One of the largest misconceptions from my perspective is that influence is all about being forceful. So sometimes we think of it as being in a conversation and having the loudest voice, or in the context of negotiation, we think of it as having the strongest amount of power. And from my perspective, I'd be curious about yours in all the negotiations that you've been part of or advised on. Influence, it's more subtle, and it's really about relationships. So when you look at some of the research, for instance, you discover that to create better relationships, we need to think about trust and building trust. We need to think about not only asking great questions, but also truly listening to understand. And so I found that often negotiations, interactions do not go as well as one would hope, because we think more about being forceful rather than focusing on the relationship, focusing on connecting rather than pushing. What about you?
Well, I think, from my experience, and I bring the cultural element there, if I may, in some cultures, I'm thinking, for instance, about France and Germany specifically, the word influence is often confused with manipulation. So a misconception that I see in the world of influence is that people, do you want to come to my influencing workshop? No, I don't do those things, right? Because people will immediately confuse influence and manipulation, and then ended up, looking at influencing as something bad. While, like you say, if we look at influencing as a relationship, as building trust, then of course, it's a completely different point of view, and it becomes a much nicer thing.
I love that you pointed that out. It's interesting that, in a sense, influence is a set of skills. And then we're not there to tell leaders or whoever we are advising or working with to use that skill in a way that is good or bad. We hope that these skills are being used in a way that advances the interest of everyone in that interaction, whether a collaboration or, again, a negotiation. But I would agree with you that often it's misunderstood and has negative connotations where it doesn't need to have that connotation.
Yeah. And by the way, the kind of definition, maybe, also to put a bit the setting, and let me tell you, how do I differentiate persuasion from influencing? I look at persuasion as a one-off, one-way kind of things. The kind of person that calls you and says, we have a 30% off on this internet subscription. Do you want to sign up today? That's persuasion, one-off kind of things. While influencing, I look at it as a medium to long-term bilateral process where, we influence each other and we build the right relationship, which will help us, to work effectively together. Do you have a slightly different definition, or is pretty much, what you also teach in your classes?
We are thinking about this, I'd say, almost in the same way. I often bring out persuasion when I'm working with leaders, for example, and we're looking specifically at a message that needs to be conveyed and what it is that can be done, changing the language so that it is more persuasive. And instead, as you said, influence is more of a broader process where there are multiple occasions to build that connection, to make sure that we are taking action in our communication, but also beyond our communications to reach certain outcomes.
Yeah, fantastic. Perfect. Now, You mentioned at the beginning, this element about, the human side, which is important in influence. How does understanding of human psychology transform your ability to influence others?
I think it's a critical aspect of making sure that we are effective in influencing others. Again, even if it's organization, negotiation with organizations or groups interacting with other groups inside the same company or outside the company, we're talking about people in the end. And so it seems really difficult to imagine a world where we don't consider the reality and the importance of human psychology. And so to me, understanding how people think, feel, and make decision is truly a critical component to understand how we can be more or less effective as we influence others. So, for example, one of the great scholars that for many years talked about strategies of influence is Robert Cialdini. And one of the principles he made quite popular through his writing and through his work is that of reciprocity. And the idea is simply that if we give something to someone, could be a concession in a negotiation, could be something that they want, people feel inclined to give back. That's a really good psychological finding that we can keep top of mind, for example, when we're thinking about the back and forth that happens in interactions during collaborations or during negotiations. So to me, having a better understanding of human psychology gives us really great understanding of how to move as we communicate and try to influence one another. I'm curious, based on your experience in procurement, how much of what you've done in the practice of negotiating derived from a better understanding of human psychology.
Well, um, you know, to be fully transparent, when I started my procurement career, it was still the times of the hard negotiation, right? Carras was, the main negotiation thing. So, there was so much focus on the win-lose element than on the win-win. Is that as I evolved during my career, and I realized, that this kind of approach, will not work, especially when you try to influence people internally, right? Maybe, if you work with a giant like Procter and Gamble, where I started my career, even if you have, a tough approach and you are not so much into the human side, because people want to work with you, they ended up, still finding solutions and coming your way. But when you try to get, the marketing director to work with you, then of course, you need to have a different way of doing things. And if you don't develop, this human psychology, then you are in trouble. And by the way, when I talk with people in the corporate world, and a lot of my customers are in procurement because of my background, then very often people tell me that they find the internal influencing more difficult than the external negotiation.
I wonder whether sometimes it's easier to ask questions about people's assumptions or fears and aspirations when we're interacting with people outside of our own organization. And it's easier for us to make assumptions about what everybody else on the team or our colleagues are thinking about in relationship to the initiative or projects that we're discussing. And again, understanding the motivation behind what people are doing or thinking, or the fears or the doubts. It's all about human psychology from my perspective.
Yeah. And what's complicated probably more also internally is all the stereotype and perspective that may be there, So oh, the people from finance are always like this, the people from procurement are always like that, or and by the way, the image may be different from one company to the other, right? So that's also something that we have to overcome in order to be more effective, in our approach to influence, because otherwise, this may stop us, to do it in a proper way. Yeah.
Absolutely. I can think of a lot of situations where I advise leaders, executives across all sorts of organizations where the major barrier was, I have this brilliant idea, or there is this wonderful initiative. And as I brought it to my colleagues or to the group or to the broader organization, it just didn't go anywhere. There was resistance. And it's almost stopping and asking the question, why is it that they don't see my brilliance? But again, if we think about the influence piece, we can start asking questions about, maybe the idea is brilliant in our own mind, but it's unclear to the very people we are trying to influence. Or maybe we haven't built the credibility or trust that is needed in order for them to give us the space to understand what we are proposing. Or maybe people just have different values, a different agenda. And again, we're failing to understanding by assuming that we know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and for instance, when I do this kind of work with procurement people, something that limits their ability to influence is that very often people see procurement as a threat to freedom. If I don't work with procurement, I can do what I want. But if I start working with procurement, then they will start telling me, oh, you cannot do this, you have to make 3 offers, you have to follow the contract terms, and etc., etc. So then people try to find all kind of escape route, and try to discard the advice, try to rationalize, some of their fears to justify why they're not doing things. And this, of course, makes things more difficult. So, these are, I think, the people that are listening to us, may recognize some of their dynamics. I see people, from different functions in the group, people from finance, people from marketing, people from procurement, and a number of them, have joined workshop with me in the past. But, each one of you may recognize, some of the challenges that you face inside the organization when you try to put your message across. And by the way, it's one of the expectations that one of the participants outlined at the beginning. So maybe let's go on this one. But how do you influence effectively when you have no authority?
That's such a great question, and one that does come up quite a bit. First of all, I would ask whoever is asking the question to ensure that they don't go into a very natural exercise in their own mind where they conclude that since they don't have the authority, they're not going to be effective in the way they influence. Since I don't believe that's true. It might be more challenging in some ways, but if anything, the fact that we have no authority makes us realize that we really need to understand what are the goals of the very people we're trying to influence. What is their agenda? And is there some common ground? Or is there a way that we can add value in the relationship? Because by what we're doing or what we could be saying, we're actually advancing their interest or where they want to go. So I would, again, think carefully about building that relationship and making sure that as we interact with the person who might have more power than us, we are clear on the ways in which what we are doing actually creates value and helps them advance what they are trying to achieve. And so I bring in clarity. I would make sure that we ask questions with curiosity and we listen so that we truly understand the interest that they have. This is, again, a question that I'm sure you also had been asked many different times. What's your take on it based on your experience?
I'm thinking the things that comes into my mind the most is really this idea of softening the resistance of the people, right?
Mm,
And so first, maybe let me say one thing. Negotiating with influence with no authority, I think it can apply also to the senior people, because the
mm,
times are gone where with the authority you will say, okay, you do this. So even if you are the boss, you still have to influence your direct report to do things, because if you just tell them to do, well, it's not going to work for the long term. So I would say it can work all the ways, not only
mm,
from below to the top, but somehow even the more senior people will have to look at how do you get people to want to do the things rather than just do it because you ask them to. So with that in mind, probably the biggest barrier that I will highlight is the resistance that people face.
mm,
And I think Stevenson Carlbach, that is also teaching at Harvard in the PON program, and is also part, by the way, of the high performance negotiation program. And he does a lot of work about reducing the resistance that you get to people.
mm,
And you mentioned before the questions, you mentioned before the active listening. Maybe a topic that we have not yet touched is using soft language,
mm,
you know because when we train people about competitive win-lose negotiation, what do we tell them? Assertive language, decisive language. I want this, I need this. Now when you want to try to influence your colleague, the more you come in with some software, maybe we should consider
mm.
this kind of things are certainly much more acceptable to the people that you're trying to influence. The more they see you as, the aggressive, decisive type of guy, the more this is going to generate resistance to your ideas. Do you agree, Francesca?
I very much I was nodding as you were speaking, partly because my colleagues and I have done research in the context of situations where we don't see eye to eye. And again, the idea is if I want to influence your thinking, because I disagree with you, you almost have this posture often, not you, but most of us have this posture of, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to fight you to show you how wrong you are. And it's forceful as an approach. And in the language is assertive. And what we found actually examining the language is that you're right. That part of what help us is bringing in a little bit of uncertainty. We call it edging. So rather than saying, I'm 100% sure that this is the way to go, we would say, one perspective on the issue is, one possibility is, one of the things that we could be doing is. We have a framework with an acronym to make it easier to remember the different components of the language. We call it HERE. So the H is, in fact, for hedging your claims. The E is to emphasize areas of agreement. Again, we might disagree on how to solve the problem, but we agree that the problem needs to be solved. So highlighting that area of common ground is important. The A is to acknowledge others' perspectives. Again, you're not necessarily agreeing with them, but you acknowledge there is a different way of looking at the same issue. And the R, which is maybe most relevant in context of conflicts, is reframing in positive term. So saying things like, I really appreciate that you brought out that perspective, or I'm grateful that you're looking at this from this different way, rather than staying in the negative and going
Yeah,
fight mode. So very
yeah,
much in agreement with you on
yeah.
softening the language a bit.
Yeah, my favorite example is um, I appreciated when people let me finish my sentence, rather than say I hate it when people interrupt me. I appreciated when people let me finish my sentence.
Wonderful, Giuseppe, you're making me think about whether I interrupted you. And hopefully not.
No, not at all. By the way, On this topic, I had a wonderful exchange also with Hordi Quidback, and this brings us it gives me the opportunity to talk for a moment about a program that Francesca and I, Hordi, Stevenson, and some of the best minds in the field of influence and negotiation are doing now. So do allow me 1 minute to talk about our high performance negotiation and influencing program, because as I was mentioning, we have some of the brightest minds that are together in order to share some of the best learning on negotiation and influencing. It's a journey that lasts for 12 months from March. So it starts the 17th of March and ends the 23rd of February 2026.
Mm-hmm.
One workshop per month, and you ended up having 10 of the best experts in the world on the field. Francesca is one of them. We talked about Stevenson Kalbach, who is also teaching in the Harvard PON program. We have Owen from Oxford. We have Dylan from Yale. A number of people that really have marked the space in the field of negotiation and influencing. Now, one of the things is that you have a choice of 10 different sessions, and you can choose a la carte the ones that you prefer. You can buy 4 modules, 5 modules, 6 modules, or you buy two packages and you get 10 modules. And this gives you the opportunity to choose the session which are more relevant. Now, we are not going to go through the session because that's not the objective of today, but you will find in the chat the link to our high performance negotiation and influencing program. So, do take a look. If the topic of negotiation and influencing is something which is close to your heart, maybe you want to go deeper than just, this short chat between Francesca and I, and then, you can continue to continue the learning journey. So the link is on the chat. Maybe we have a question from the audience. So how about if we start taking the first question? Regina. So, question. Do you believe that you can influence people in writing in the same way convincing that those oral when meeting them in person? Part 2 of the question. Can ChatGPT help you to write a convincing narrative to influence? Okay. So, first part is about, can we be as convincing in writing than when we are orally?
There is a mantra that I try my best to live by. I don't always succeed, but it's a mantra that comes from some beautiful writing from a colleague at HBS, Francis Fry, and her wife, Anne Morris. They talk about the idea of being able to explain things clearly only when we understand them deeply. And I'm bringing this up because to me, it addresses actually both aspects of the questions. What is hard in thinking about communicating via emails or in writing, we can be really effective and clear as long as we have that deep understanding. And in the case in which we're not trying to understand the problem on our own, but we're trying to understand a person on the other side and their interest, we need to make sure that before there is that clear communication, we have an ability to ask questions, to really get a sense of what they're interested in, what their motivation is, what their fears are. And so, sure, we can be very effective and clear in writing. And in fact, sometimes putting things on paper help us see whether we're clear or not. However, that should follow a back and forth of some form where we truly understand what's on the mind of the other side in a negotiation or colleagues inside of work. And so for the same reasons, I guess ChatGPT could help us. I'm curious, Giuseppe, on your thinking here. But once we have that deep understanding, that is something that we need to own, that we need to do. And then we can think about getting extra help on whether the communication is clear or not.
Yeah. And my thought on this is that we should be using different kind of means, to be effective. So, there is space for written communication, there is space for verbal. So, even when we are doing a virtual meeting, yes, we will be doing the video chat, but at the same time, we may exchange messages on WhatsApp with the counterpart, and then, we're going to summarize in writing at the end of the meeting, and we're going to prepare the agenda. So, we will be using different kind of means, but certainly, I will not rush into going to writing if you have not done the discovery journey before. No matter how ChatGPT can help you, to write the message nicely, if you have not understood what are the interest and priority of the other party, there is no ChatGPT that can help you to make a very persuasive message.
Yeah, understand deeply to explain simply. I love that way of thinking.
Yeah. Fantastic. Now let's take another question. Is from Shipra. Let's see. Hi Shipra, does influencing look different in East from the West part of the world?
Giuseppe, I feel like that question is for you, since you've traveled the world so much. And so I might ask for your perspective. First, what have you seen in terms of some of the main differences in light of the fact that we tend to associate some culture with being more transactional and individualistic, and some other cultures being more relational?
Yeah. I think, it really goes back to the theory of cross-cultural, all the cross-cultural negotiation and all the learning that we have done about culture. So, Shipra, I think a classical one, if we compare India with the Western world, for instance, right, it's how much focus you may put on relationship compare to the way the Western people will do, right? So then while, if I may, Francesca is based in the US, she may hear, time is money. So, okay, yes, we're going to do a bit of chit chat, but let's quickly go to the substance because, that's what we are paid for. And I guess, instead, in the Asian culture, and of course, talking about, of course, big generalization like the West and the East, are bringing trouble. But let's say if I think about India, if I think about Japan, if I think about China, then of course, the focus on relationship is something that will certainly come as one of the major differences. Now, I can tell you also another thing is, one of the things that may frustrate also a number of people from the Western world is that many European culture and American culture are individualistic. So, since when a culture is individualistic, the people that you are trying to influence is one. You have a person, and you're trying to influence one person. Now, in a more collectivistic culture, then of course, it's not enough to influence one person, and the decisions are not taken so quickly because there has to be a consensus which takes place. So again, that's another dimension where you will see a difference. By the way, I'm currently in Thailand. I'm going to stay in Thailand until the end of February, so I will have the opportunity in the next 5 weeks to discover some more about Thailand, and then I'll be making a few more examples about Thailand afterwards.
Giuseppe, another dimension that comes to mind is in relationship to power and authority. So there are definitely cultures where there is more deference. And I think that becomes relevant in thinking about influence when we think about not only influencing the substance, but also influencing the process. So in cultures where there is a lot of deference to authority, I would make sure that when we're talking to an individual outside of the organization, we understand who has power in signing a deal if we're in a negotiation or advancing a project. And so that is more front and center when that is the case. And so not only trying to influence the substance, but also influencing the process as well.
Fantastic. Now, since you talked about the topic of negotiation, maybe let me jump on that one. Now, in a high stakes negotiation, what is the one influencing mistake that even experienced leaders make, from your experience?
One of the common mistakes is focusing too much on winning rather than understanding. When I teach negotiation sessions live, often I have a 30-second exercise where I pair people up, ask them to roll up their sleeves and engage in arm wrestling for 10 seconds. Usually get strange looks in the room, but then everybody is like, okay, I'm looking at my muscles, I worked out, and they pair up. And I then say, here is the rule and the goal. The goal is to make as many points as possible. And the rule is that you make a point every time you put the other person down, and I'm asking for silence. And reliably, no matter where you are in the world, what you see in the room is people having red faces because they're pushing as hard as they can on the arm of the other side. And at the end of the 10 seconds, I look around, and generally, maybe you have a couple of points for people who did work out more, and so they have bigger muscles. But in most cases, we spend the entire 10 seconds pushing. And I think that is quite revealing if we put that type of mindset in the context of high-stake negotiations. We ask very easily, what's the size of our muscle? How much power do we have? And then we use the time to press, to leverage the power to put the other person down. That is a winning focus type mindset. And I'm not saying that that's not helpful, but we need to create this space for understanding. There is a different way to run the exercise in those 10 seconds and to win more points. And we do this. That requires a different type of mindset where, again, we're shifting from what we want out of this negotiation to the why we want it, to understanding the underlying interests, concerns, preferences. And together, again, we need to shift away on that winning type mindset. How would you have approached this question? What comes to mind for you, Giuseppe?
Now, the second element is similar to yours, and I will call it in terms of arguments versus questions. That many people think that, if I want to be influential, I have to talk and I'm going to be very persuasive and I'm going to explain to the other person that I'm right and they're wrong. And that's where I'm saying, decrease the number of arguments and increase the number of questions, and brings back, to the understanding point that you were mentioning, right? If I do spend more time asking the right question, then I'm more likely to get the right answers. By the way, one of the trainer that is part of the high performance negotiation, Hordy Quidback, wrote an article in Harvard Business Review of September when was looking at questions, open-ended questions using artificial intelligence. So what are the question that brings us the best quality of information? And the key finding from this article that you can find, as I said, in the Harvard Business School of September, Business Review of September, is that the why question are the one that help you collect most of the information, but are also the one that make people more defensive.
Mm.
Then the how question are the one that people accept more easily, but they let you get less information. And the what are somewhere in between.
Mm.
So, my practical advice is try to avoid the why question and replace them with how and what. They may be a simple one. By the way, let me also share my favorite question. My favorite question is, what will it take to?
Mm.
I don't know if you have a favorite one, but I like what will it take to. That, it shows to the other party, listen, I am flexible. I'm open to listen to your ideas. So tell me what you want. And at the same time, it gets the other party into a problem solving mode.
Mm.
So even somebody, that is in a winning mode, is not very open, when you ask this kind of question, it gets them to think in a more proactive way.
Interesting. I love the why questions, but asking it in round two as the second question, as the follow up question. I'm going to give you an example. Let's imagine that I really want to understand how you like to work. One question that I could ask you to then gather that information and see how we can figure out how to set up the collaboration or the partnership. I would say, hey, Giuseppe, who's the best boss you've ever worked with? And then I would follow up and ask, why is this person the best boss you've ever had? Because likely you're going to say, oh, the best boss was named so and so. And I really enjoyed them as a boss because they gave me a lot of autonomy. They never questioned what I was doing. Now I know that you appreciate autonomy. You're not really describing your boss, you're describing your preferences. And so I do like the why questions, but as a follow up rather than the one we start with.
Nice. Wow, lovely. Okay, fantastic. Listen, we have a question from the audience. So let's try to get. We have two questions. Oh, we have more questions. Okay, let's take the first question from Daniela. Okay, what methods can help transform challenging conversations into collaborative opportunities?
So I'll give you a couple. And again, Giuseppe, I'm super curious about your perspective here. One is returning to the framework that we discussed earlier, especially when we have really strong convictions or strong perspective. We go into this mode of, I'm going to show you how much you're wrong. And when we do that, we fail to use the here framework. And we also go into the mode where I'm listening to what you're saying to just pick the thing that is going to help me advance my argument rather than asking questions to understand yours. So I would think of it as, let's make sure that our posture is one of curiosity and wanting to understand rather than one where I keep asking myself, what's wrong with you? Why is it that you're being so difficult? It's one that truly shift our attention to saying, I'm sure there is a valid reason for why you have the perspective and you need to figure that out. What is it that I'm lacking or missing that doesn't allow me to understand where you're coming from? So that's one. And the second one that is somewhat related, and it comes down to our language, is making sure that we stay truthful to what we want to learn. Here's what I mean by this. And this is something, it's a point that it's made in a book called Difficult Conversations by some of colleagues at the law school here at Harvard. The idea is to make sure that we don't ask questions that are really statements that we're trying to make. The example that I often think of, since I am the mom of four, is being in the car, driving somewhere, and it's a long trip, and then you have the 5-year-old asking, "Are we there yet?" And like, it's clear that we're not there. There is more to go, but it comes from frustration. It's truly a request of, could we stop to pause since I'm tired, or I don't want to be in the car any longer. And if we apply that to a lot of situations where we're in challenging conversations, or situations that are difficult, we often use those type of questions instead of making a statement. Sometimes I apply that to my own relationship with my husband, and I think about, were you planning to put the dishes in the dishwasher? Like, we do that naturally, and we're not going to be perceived in the right way. And while we might be frustrated, it's much better to understand the question that we want to ask because we're genuinely curious, and the statements that we want to make that might help others understand how we are feeling about the challenge they were experiencing. Those are my thoughts. What about you, Giuseppe?
No, I think you already cover a lot of impersonation. Then we also mentioned, we talk about the here framework, we talk about listen, we talk about questioning. Maybe then, Daniele, I know that you're already an experienced influencer, and we had the pleasure to work together a couple of times. And one of the things that represents the next level is the ability to read the context and to understand at which moment the other person is open to collaboration. And this involves, being fully present, being really there, watching the facial expression, the body language, the level of energy, and then seeing when there is a change, because he should be looking for a change that tells me, okay, it looks that there is an opening. That's the moment where I can make a shift and I can come up with my proposal, get them, because you may have a great idea, but if you bring it at the wrong moment when the other person is still closed, it may not go through. Fantastic. By the way, thank you for the great question that we are getting so far. Remember, I think, oh boy, we are already 48. Okay, maybe. Okay, let's go for another couple of questions. Maybe one more for the audience, and then we go. But staying with experiences, can you share a time when influence went wrong and what you learned from it?
Ooh, I think I have a few. The one that stands out the most is it was in a collaboration with a team where I wanted to bring in a new process. And I had such strong convictions about the brilliance of the new process. And I just kept emphasizing the benefits. And you just spoke about the idea of timing. It was the wrong time to bring about the benefits because I was so enthusiastic that I overlooked their concerns about the challenges that they would have in implementing the new process. And so I was just met with great resistance rather than acceptance from the other side. So I really didn't realize my failure to listen to their fears and address them. And now going back, it's sort of the word tea leaves, but I didn't pick them up. I didn't have that curiosity to explore with really the openness and mindset of, I want to understand. Because again, I was so focused on the enthusiasm of bringing this forward. So to me, it was a clear lesson of influence starts with that understanding, starts with that empathy. And before you present a solution, despite the fact that, again, might be super worked out and brilliant in your mind, try to understand where others are coming from. Show them that you're on their side instead of pushing for your agenda.
Well, the example that came into my mind instead when reading this question, it goes back to the very beginning of my career when I asked for my first promotion and I didn't get it. And I didn't get
Well,
it.
we're wrong. I'm sure you deserved it. We were wrong.
I think, there were a number of things, like, the preparation, the conditioning, the relationship that were missing. Basically, as many junior people in the world of business expect, I thought that the results will be the only thing that will justify. So, we were getting great results. We were giving, my new strategy was giving a competitive advantage to the company. So I thought that, I deserved a promotion because, the results were so brilliant. But, I had not worked on my image. Was I perceived as leadership material, somebody that was ready to move to the next level, or just an individual contributor that will do a good job? I didn't have much exposure in what I was doing. I didn't have much luck neither because my boss was stealing my work and selling it as his own. So, you can imagine that the combination of those elements led to the fact that I only had the result was not enough. So, but of course, these are things, I think, in fact, I will say that if I look at what I teach, when I do my influence with integrity workshop, most of the learning comes from failure more than from success. I think, my biggest corporate lesson are when I try to do something and it didn't work out.
I think it's definitely more natural for us as human beings to stop after we fail to say, what are we learning? There is good stuff to learn after we are successful. So I have learned a lot from leaders who, out of practice or habit, they stop after a big interaction or a big negotiation, independent of the outcome, and ask themselves what it is that I'm learning, what it is that if I were to go back, I'd do the same, what it is that if I were to go back, I'd do differently, and why.
Yeah. Maybe too close, if you could boil the secret of influence into one habit, what will it be?
The one that is top of mind for me, which underlines a lot of the comments that I have throughout our discussion today, is curiosity. Really bringing a curiosity, genuine curiosity in every interaction, seeking to understand others' perspectives, other interests, other emotions, other needs, and through that create the open doors and trust that is needed for more of a collaborative approach. So
Yeah.
I go back to curiosity, ask
Okay.
thoughtful questions, try to listen to understand, let people feel seen and understood.
Yeah.
Curiosity allows for that.
Yeah. And by the way, curiosity is one of the topics on which you made a lots of research, right? That's one of the areas where, yeah, I remember also, when I was at Merck, we start talking about, the curiosity things, and you started also some research also with Merck on the topic of curiosity. So, if you're interested in the topic of curiosity, search the work of Francesca, because there is some very interesting insight there. I think on my side, since we already touched on a number of the most important topic, maybe let me touch something that maybe is not the secret, but is probably one thing that we have not discussed yet. And this idea of profiling the people that you're gonna talk to. Right? As part of the preparation, do make sure that you understand with whom you're talking. And it's not only about, their job title or the kind of things that they may be on the website about the official objective of the function, or those kind of things. But probably the most interesting information is something that you're going to get by talking to people. So let's imagine, I don't know, I know that most of you are in a corporate environment. Let's say that you were influence a vice president, of a director of a group. Well, maybe you have a good relationship with some of the managers in their team. They may be able to tell a bit more about this person. So you may discover their preferred communication styles, they may prefer the hobbies, etc. Maybe also they may tell you something about the internal dynamics inside the team. Or, Francois and Bill are competing for the next jobs, among they cannot see eye to each other. So, don't mention Francois if you want to have a good relationship with Bill, or, those kind of things that you're never going to find written anywhere. But then you can make a hell of a difference if you are then using them in the right ways.
Beautiful. And again, you need curiosity.
And you need curiosity to discover. Exactly. You need curiosity to discover all those things. Well, Francesca, it was such a pleasure. It was such a pleasure to exchange with you. Thank you also for the audience for the sharp question that you raised. And thank you also for the people that are watching the recording of this event. Maybe just a very quick reminder, I just want to tell you, if you're interested in the topic of negotiation and influencing, then why don't you come and join our high performance negotiation and influencing program, a journey that lasts 1 year plus 2 years of follow-up journey remotely, and you're gonna have 10 live sessions once per month. So it's not an overwhelming commitment. It's something that you can easily fit even in a busy schedule, and you can choose a la carte the modules that you prefer. So check the link on the chat if you're interested to find out some more. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. I take again the opportunity to thank Francesca for this rich exchange. Thank you everyone for your active participation. All the very best. Thank you.